In a small, quiet town nestled along the banks of a winding river, there lived a young man named Daniel. Daniel had always been a restless soul, his mind constantly churning with questions, and his heart yearning for something more than the routine of his everyday life. One day, as Daniel was walking along the riverbank, he stumbled upon an old man sitting on a weathered wooden bench, gazing out over the gentle current. Drawn by the man's serene presence, Daniel approached him and introduced himself. "Good morning, sir," Daniel said. "I don't believe I've seen you around here before. My name is Daniel." The old man turned to him with a warm smile. "Ah, hello, young Daniel. My name is Jacob, and I've come to this river many times over the years to find solace and wisdom." Daniel was immediately intrigued. "Wisdom, you say? What kind of wisdom could one find in a simple river?" Jacob chuckled, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "Ah, my dear boy, you would be surprised at the lessons a river can teach. Why don't you join me for a spell, and I'll see if I can't impart a bit of that wisdom to you." Intrigued, Daniel sat down next to the old man, his gaze fixed on the gentle flow of the water before them. "You see, Daniel," Jacob began, "a river is a living, breathing entity, constantly in motion, always changing and adapting to the forces that shape its course. It is a metaphor for the very nature of life itself." Daniel listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Just as the river flows ever onward, never staying in one place for long, so too must we learn to navigate the twists and turns of our own lives." Jacob continued, "The river does not fight against the obstacles it encounters, but rather it finds a way around them, carving a new path through the landscape." Daniel nodded, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the old man's words. "And in that, Daniel, lies the key to true wisdom," Jacob said, his voice growing more serious. "You see, the river teaches us that true strength is not in the ability to bulldoze our way through life, but in the flexibility to adapt and change as circumstances demand." Daniel considered this, his gaze drawn once more to the tranquil surface of the river. "But how does one learn to be like the river?" he asked. "To be so adaptable and resilient in the face of adversity?" Jacob smiled, his weathered face creasing into a knowing expression. "Ah, that is the question, isn't it? The answer, my dear boy, lies in the very nature of the river itself." He paused, his eyes fixed on the water. "You see, the river is constantly in motion, constantly responding to the changing currents and obstacles it encounters. It does not resist the forces that act upon it, but rather it embraces them, using them to carve its path forward." Daniel nodded, his mind whirling with the implications of Jacob's words. "And so, to be like the river," Jacob continued, "we must learn to let go of our own rigid expectations and preconceptions. We must be willing to adapt, to change, to flow with the ebbs and tides of life, rather than trying to fight against them." Daniel felt a surge of understanding begin to take root within him. "So it's about letting go of control and trusting in the process?" Jacob nodded, a gentle smile playing across his lips. "Precisely, my boy. The river teaches us that true wisdom lies in the ability to surrender to the moment, to let go of our need to control every aspect of our lives." He gestured to the water before them. "Look at the river, Daniel. See how it effortlessly navigates the rocks and eddies, never fighting against them, but simply finding a way around them. That is the essence of true wisdom, the ability to adapt and flow rather than to resist and struggle." Daniel watched the river intently, mesmerized by the way it flowed around the obstacles in its path. He could feel the weight of his own struggles and worries begin to lift, as if the very act of observing the river had opened his eyes to a new way of seeing the world. "But what about the big decisions, the major life events?" he asked, his gaze turning back to Jacob. "Surely those require more than just going with the flow." Jacob chuckled, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Ah, my dear boy, that is where the wisdom of the river truly shines. For even in the face of the most daunting challenges, the river teaches us to approach them with a steady, unwavering resolve." He gestured to the water once more. "You see, the river does not simply drift aimlessly, carried by the current. It has a clear destination, a purpose that guides its every movement. And yet it is flexible, adaptable, willing to change courses necessary to reach that destination. Daniel nodded, his mind churning with the implications of Jacob's words. So it's about finding that balance, he said, between having a clear sense of purpose and being willing to adapt to the changing circumstances? Jacob smiled, his gaze warm and encouraging. Precisely, Daniel. The river shows us that true wisdom lies in the ability to hold fast to our deepest values and goals, while remaining open and responsive to the unfolding of life's events. He paused, his expression growing more contemplative. You see, the river does not fight against the obstacles it encounters, but neither does it simply surrender to them. Instead, it uses its power and momentum to carve a new path, to find a way around the challenges that stand in its way. Daniel felt a surge of inspiration and determination welling up within him. That's incredible, he breathed. I can see how those lessons could be applied to so many different aspects of life. Jacob nodded, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. Ah, but the river has even more to teach us, my dear boy. For you see, the river is not just a metaphor for life's journey. It is also a mirror, reflecting back to us the very essence of our own being. Daniel's brow furrowed in confusion. A mirror? I'm afraid I don't quite understand. Jacob chuckled, his weathered face creasing into a warm smile. You see, Daniel, the river is a constant, ever-changing reflection of the world around it. It absorbs the light and the shadows, the colors and the shapes, and it reflects them back to us in a never-ending dance of light and form. He paused, his gaze turning inward. And in that, my boy, lies a profound truth about the nature of our own existence. For just as the river reflects the world around it, so too do we, as individuals, reflect the world within us. Our thoughts, our emotions, our deepest beliefs and desires. Daniel nodded, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of Jacob's words. So you're saying that the river can teach us about ourselves? He asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Jacob smiled, his eyes crinkling with warmth. Precisely, Daniel. The river is a mirror, not just of the external world, but of the internal landscape of our own being. And by learning to read its reflections, we can gain valuable insights into the very nature of our own existence. He paused, his gaze drifting back to the water. You see, the river is never static, never the same from one moment to the next. It is constantly in flux, constantly responding to the forces that shape its course. And in that, it mirrors the very nature of our own minds and hearts, ever changing, ever adapting, ever flowing. Daniel felt a surge of understanding begin to take root within him. So by observing the river, I can learn something about myself? Jacob nodded, his expression growing more serious. Indeed, my boy. For just as the river reflects the world around it, so too does it reflect the depths of our own inner lives. The eddies and currents, the rapids and the still pools, they all have their own unique lessons to teach us about the ebbs and flows of our own thoughts and emotions. He paused, his gaze turning to Daniel. And in learning to read those reflections, to understand the patterns and rhythms of the river, we can gain a deeper understanding of our own nature, our strengths, our weaknesses, our deepest desires and fears. Daniel felt a sense of wonder and excitement begin to build within him. This is incredible, he breathed. I never would have thought that a simple river could hold such profound wisdom. Jacob chuckled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Ah, but that is the beauty of the river, my dear boy. For it is a teacher that is always present, always available to those who are willing to open their eyes and their hearts to its lessons. He paused, his gaze turning once more to the water. And the more we learn to listen to the river, to respond to its rhythms and patterns, the more we can begin to apply that wisdom to the challenges and complexities of our own lives. Daniel nodded, his mind racing with the implications of Jacob's words. So where do I start? He asked, his voice filled with eager anticipation. Jacob smiled, his weathered face creasing into a warm expression. Ah, my dear boy, the first step is simply to be present, to quiet your mind, to open your senses, and to truly immerse yourself in the flow of the river. He gestured to the water before them. Just observe, Daniel. Watch the way the current moves, the way the light plays across the surface, the way the river responds to the obstacles in its path. And as you do, try to let go of your own preconceptions and simply be open to the lessons the river has to teach you. Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on the tranquil surface of the river. He could feel a sense of calm and focus begin to wash over him, as if the very presence of the water was soothing his restless mind. "And what if I get stuck?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't see the lessons the river is trying to teach me?" Jacob chuckled, his expression warm and reassuring. "Ah, but that is where the true wisdom of the river comes into play, my boy. For just as the river flows ever onward, so too must we be willing to let go of our own preconceptions and trust in the unfolding of the journey." He paused, his gaze once more turning to the water. "You see, the river does not force its way through the obstacles it encounters, but rather it finds a way to navigate them, to flow around them, to carve a new path. And in that, it teaches us the power of patience, of flexibility, of trust in the process." Daniel nodded, his mind whirling with the implications of Jacob's words. "So if I get stuck, I should just keep observing, keep listening, and trust that the river will show me the way forward?" he asked. Jacob smiled, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "Precisely, my dear boy. For the river is a constant, ever-present teacher, offering its wisdom to those who are willing to learn." He turned to Daniel, his expression growing more serious. "But remember, Daniel, the lessons of the river are not just for the mind, they are for the heart and the spirit as well. For in learning to read the reflections of the river, we can gain not just intellectual understanding, but a deeper sense of connection to the world around us and to the very essence of our own being." Daniel felt a surge of gratitude and wonder welling up within him. "Thank you, Jacob," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you how much your words have resonated with me. I feel like I've been given a gift, a new way of seeing the world and my place in it." Jacob chuckled, his weathered hand reaching out to give Daniel's arm a gentle squeeze. "Ah, my dear boy, the gift is yours to claim. All you need to do is open your eyes, open your heart, and let the river be your guide."